Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Dawid Ziółkowski, and I'm going to talk about solution I create for deploying Kubernetes cluster in around 1 minute. Yeah, as I just said, when I did that solution around a year ago, and back then it was really taking a bit less than 60 seconds. Now it takes a bit more, around 70 seconds for the changes in the cloud providers. But doesn't change much because again the point of solution was to create something to deploy Kubernetes cluster really quickly. So let me give you a bit of a background why I did it in general. So I work at Continuous Solutions. I work as a cloud native consultant. That means I need to very often do some POCs, some quick tests, test some solutions. And for that, I really need to deploy and create and deploy new clusters, sometimes a few times a day. It's not enough for me to just clean the cluster, right? To clean all the pods and services and so on. Sometimes I need to check the deployment of the cluster itself. That's why I really needed a solution to deploy brand new cluster, right? So what options did I have? I could use something like Minikube or some local distributions, but that really didn't really work for most of the tests because for most of the tests I was doing, I need really the cluster as it would be in production or like the real Kubernetes cluster, let's say. So I could use managed cluster solutions, managed Kubernetes for any cloud providers. And I was using that for quite some time. And yeah, it's easy, of course, right? You just click deploy, and after a couple of minutes, you get the cluster. And that was working fine. The only problem was that it takes a long time. So depending on the cloud provider you use, of course, it takes around 10 to 15 minutes to create a cluster. So when you do it once a month or once a week, then it doesn't seem that much. But when you need to do it 5 times a day, then it's 50 minutes a day of waiting, right? So I wanted to do something to deploy cluster in really minutes. So as you can see, I ended up in a solution with a solution where I can deploy the whole cluster in around 1 minute. So in this talk, I'm going to show you how I did it and what you can do with it. Because as I mentioned, for me, I created the solution purely to solve the issue I had, right? So I need to test something quickly. I need a cluster quickly. But after I did it, I realized that there are some nice use cases for that. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So yeah, that was the only 2 slides I have because it's all about live demo today. I will show you how the solution works. I will go you through the code, and I will paste the link to the repository because the solution is open source. I will paste the link to repository after my talk on hopping. Okay, so let's start from the demo actually. Hope it works. Let's see what happens. So what it does and what it is, it's a simple bash script, and I really like the talk from Martin this morning, especially the last slides when he mentioned that using bash, if it's a script under hundred lines of bash, it's totally fine, right? And that was the question I was getting quite often, like, oh, nice, this deployment for you, but why didn't you use like Terraform or something like that? And I'm asking like, yeah, why would I? Like it's 50 lines of code of bash, and it just works, right? So yeah, of course, if you want something like really production grade, if you want to deploy clusters for your production environment, then yeah, I wouldn't recommend to use this. But this was made purely for tests, purely for POC. So if you can make it with bash, it took me like a couple of hours to write that script. So why not, right? It works. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's a bash script which connects to Google Cloud. Ask the Google Cloud to deploy 4 virtual machines, 1 for master, 3 for worker nodes, and then deploys K3s on it. I will talk in a second what K3s is. Then downloads kubectl config, loads it to my system, and that's it. So as you can see, in 75 seconds, I have a Kubernetes cluster ready. That's it. I don't need to do anything else. I could already deploy some deployments on it. let's delete that cluster. And in the meantime, while it's deleting, I need to clarify something. So yeah, as I said, what it does, it's a bash script which connects to Google Cloud, deploys virtual machines, then deploys K3s on it. And let's stop here. So what is K3s? For those of you who don't know, K3s is a lightweight Kubernetes distribution. Let me show you something. So if you want to know more about K3s itself, you can just go to k3s.io. As I mentioned, it's lightweight Kubernetes distribution. What it means is that the guys from Launcher, they took Kubernetes and they just strip it down from stuff which you not always need. Some outdated plugins, cloud container, cloud container managers. I forgot how it's called. Anyway, they removed some stuff which you usually don't need from Kubernetes, and they ended up with a single binary which weighs less than 40 megabytes, if I'm correct. Yes, it's a single binary which weighs less than 40 megabytes, which you can just download and run, and then you have Kubernetes master node running, right? So it gives you only one node, one master node, but of course, you can deploy few of these and then with special parameters connected to a cluster. So in the basic, the very basic version, you can just copy paste this this command, which is just downloading the script, which downloads the binary, checks which system you are running, so it can download the appropriate binary and then runs it. Right. So if you deploy this on your system, you just copy paste, deploy this on your system. In around 30 seconds, you get the Kubernetes cluster. Kubernetes node, Kubernetes master node. There are some limitations, of course. You need to run, if you do just this, then you need to run kubectl through K3s binary. So what I did with the script of mine, I basically just extended this this solution, right? So instead of deploying one master node, I'm deploying 4 nodes, where 1 is master and 3 workers. It's, if you want more or less, it's just, you can just change it in a script. It's very easy to, it's just one parameter to change it. Then it loads the kube config to your system, so you can also use it natively, let's say. And yeah, that's it. So it's not magic. I just automated what could be done manually with K3s. So is our cluster done? Okay, our cluster is deleted. Let's create another one just to see if it's not fake. So as I mentioned, the solution is just also automation for K3s. And as I also mentioned, K3s is a lightweight Kubernetes. And that means it works as a real Kubernetes cluster, right? So unlike some local solutions like Minikube or something like that, it's basically a normal, let's say, Kubernetes cluster. It just doesn't have some things. But for me, it didn't matter because, as I mentioned, for me, it was just a solution to quickly deploy something, quickly do some POC. So if I can just execute one line, one command, wait around a minute, and then deploy whatever I want to test, like some deployments, anything, right? Then I can quickly test it and delete the cluster. For me, it was perfect, right? It basically solved my issues. But there are some limitations to it. First of all, one of the reasons why K3s only weighs 40 megabytes is that it doesn't include cloud control managers, which means the Kubernetes cluster which we deploy with that, even though it's deployed on Google Cloud, it's not connected to Google Cloud, right? So it doesn't understand that it's on Google Cloud, which means if you deploy Ingress or service type load balancer, it won't create a load balancer in Google for you, right? So there's this this missing connection, let's say. But there is a solution for that as well. That was the first version of the script I made. Later on, I created similar solution for DigitalOcean, And I also should mention why Google Cloud without any specific reasons. I was just using Google Cloud for tests, but this could be done pretty much on any cloud. I would have to just figure it out how to easily deploy virtual machines via API or something like that. But yeah, basically Google Cloud was without any specific reason. Later on, I switched to DigitalOcean because the solution for Google Cloud uses gcloud binary underneath, right? So what my script does, I will show you the code in a second, but what my script does, it just uses gcloud to create virtual machines. And I wanted something as well which doesn't require anything extra, right? So if I can just take that bash script, because I'm using quite a few different devices for my work. Right? I have my work MacBook. I have a normal PC at home. I have one other laptop for different tests. So quite often I'm switching from device to device. And for me, it was important that I can have something that just works everywhere without thinking, oh, do I have this binary here, or do I have I have Linux here, I have Mac OS here, I have also Windows somewhere there. So something that works just everywhere was important for me. So I created the same solution, let's say, for DigitalOcean later on, because on DigitalOcean you can very easily create virtual machines, so they call it droplets, with just HTTP calls, right? So they have just REST API, and you can just create machines with curl or something like that. So I created the same solution. Oh, it took extremely long time. I don't know why. Doesn't happen that often, but it works. So let me delete that again. Okay, so you see it works. Now we will move to DigitalOcean. Okay, so as I said, I created the same for DigitalOcean, right? So the script works pretty much the same. So it connects to DigitalOcean API to create the droplets, also 4 machines, 3 workers, 1 master. Then it deploys K3s on these nodes and then downloads kubectl copy, right? So pretty much exactly the same just for DigitalOcean. The difference is underneath that script doesn't need anything. So it's just bash, where the only thing you need, you just need to put your DigitalOcean token into one of the files, and then it just works. It doesn't need DigitalOcean CLI or anything like that. So this was pretty cool for myself because I have just one bash script which I can just put anywhere and just deploy. But for some specific tests, I needed something more. Like I needed a cluster which actually connects to the cloud. It understands where it's running, and it can deploy the actual load balancer. Right? If I wanted to test something specific about ingress, if I wanted to test different ingresses, stuff like that, then it's actually beneficial to have the connection. So what I did then is I extended that script. Actually, I created a second version of it. And I have now a script which still does the same. So still connects to DigitalOcean, creates a virtual machine on them, then deploys K3s on them, then loads kubectl config, and then creates or deploys Cloud Controller Manager on that cluster. And what it means is then that Kubernetes cluster created with that solution is able to create load balancer on DigitalOcean and properly configure it to route it to any deployment we have. Okay, so it takes a little bit more than 60 seconds because of the extra steps, because of deploying Cloud Controller Manager, but then it still takes around 2 minutes. And what you get in these 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes, depends on the day. So what you get after these 3 minutes? After these 3 minutes, you get a cluster, brand new cluster, which has a Cloud Controller Manager on it, which means it can deploy load balancer whenever you deploy service type load balancer or whenever you deploy ingress. And then on top of that, I went one step further, and I also included in the script creation of the deployment of external DNS and cert manager. And what it did is external DNS, I guess many of you know, it basically is a component which is able to create DNS entry for you. So DigitalOcean has its own DNS servers. So I added my domain to DNS, to DigitalOcean DNS servers. And then external DNS, which I deploy with that script, gets also can talk to DigitalOcean API. And then Cert Manager can talk to external DNS and understands my cluster as well. So what it means is after I create that cluster, I can create a deployment. So when I have like, right, simple Kubernetes deployment, when I say, please deploy this application, then I create a service for that deployment, and then I create an ingress for that deployment. And in the ingress, I specify under what domain this deployment should be available. And I get automatically DNS entry for it and SSL certificate for it. Okay, so after 3 minutes, I can just deploy a YAML file with deployment, service, and ingress. And after another couple of minutes, right, it takes a few minutes to refresh the DNS and so on. I get the deployment running behind HTTPS with the domain, right? So in about 5 minutes, you can go from nothing to having deployment running with HTTPS and DNS. I hope that's clear. Let me show you this. Basically, we will start the script. Go. So we will start the script. Yeah, in a second I will explain you I will show the code and explain a bit how it works exactly. But we can actually do it now because, as I said, this will take about 2 minutes, a bit longer than simple solution because it also needs to deploy Cloud Control Manager. So let me quickly go through the code. Okay, first the code for the Google Cloud solution, right? So the simple script. So yeah, so yeah, I'm taking some variables, some specific variables. Start time just to time it. Load kubectl config because you also have an option to not load the kubectl into your system, just download it, right? Because currently this, I mean, the script is pretty simple, right? So it just loads, overwrites your kubectl config, which for some specific use cases maybe not what you want. So there is also option to just download kubectl config without loading it. Then I'm saving some variables which are required for gcloud. Basically, I assume that if you want to use this, then and if you want to use on Google Cloud, then you're probably already using gcloud, right? And if you're using gcloud, then you probably have default zone on project setup, right? If not, then yeah, the script will set this for you. And then yeah, one if to delete the cluster afterwards if you want. And then, as I mentioned, the script just uses gcloud to create virtual machines, right? So standard creation of virtual machines with gcloud. I'm creating separately master nodes and separately worker nodes because yeah, they differ a bit. And then simple loop to wait for the machines to be up. Oh, and actually, before we go, that why it took 60 seconds, why it now takes 70 seconds. Half of the success was using K3s because yeah, deployment of K3s takes 30 seconds, and the other half of the success was using basically Ubuntu Minimal as a base OS for the virtual machines. So Ubuntu Minimal, as you can guess, is just lightweight Ubuntu distributions. So again, it's just Ubuntu with some stuff deleted. So I think it's around 200 megabytes, the OS image. So it also takes around 20 seconds less to deploy the virtual machines if you use Ubuntu Minimal in comparison if you use normal Ubuntu or CentOS or normal system, basically. So because I'm using Ubuntu Minimal and because I'm using K3s, that solution was possible. So yeah, then the script does a bunch of loops to wait for the machines, right, to actually check if they are up and running, if the SSH is ready. And when it's ready, first I'm just enabling the IPVS kernel module. I'm doing this because I'm using Ubuntu Minimal. So as I mentioned, Ubuntu Minimal is just lightweight Ubuntu. So one of the stuff that was removed from it, or actually disabled, was IPVS. And IPVS is just basically a kernel module which is required for K3S to work properly. It's required by Kubernetes actually. So I'm just enabling that module back, and then what I'm doing is simply doing this one line of code, which, if you remember, is similar to that one, right? It's just I'm using just the same deployment method of K3S, the official deployment of K3S. I just pass some extra parameters to it, and I'm passing these extra parameters because they are needed for this script to work. So first parameter, TLS-SUN. What it does, it instructs K3S to generate certificate for kubeconfig, also for the public IP address of the node, right? So normally, if you just run this, then you will be able to only use kubectl, use that kubeconfig with kubectl only on the same node when you deploy the cluster, because kubectl will generate the certificate, which is only valid on 127.0.0.1, so on localhost, right? So if you just take that kubeconfig loaded to your system, it won't work because the certificate mismatch. So I'm just passing this parameter to instruct K3S to also include public IP of the virtual machines, so we can easily connect to it. And then another parameter, I'm just instructing K3S that this is the public IP of the node. So this we need to do because, as I mentioned, K3S doesn't have Cloud Control Manager by default. So it can't connect to Google Cloud to ask what's the public IP address of the node. And that's a problem because if you deploy some service with node port, type node port, then you wouldn't be able to connect to that service actually from outside the cluster because K3S don't know the public IP of the node, so it can't properly route the traffic. So I'm just instructing K3S manually. Let's say, oh yeah, my script does it for you, basically. So K3S is aware what's public IP address of that node. And that's it. So these only two extra parameters are necessary to make this solution working properly. Then next step is to take the token out of the node. So K3S, as I said at the beginning, if you run this command, then you will only get one node, which is a master node, right? So if you want to add worker nodes to the cluster, you can use slightly modified version of the command this command. You just need to pass here that this will be not the server but the worker, and you will need to pass the token. So when you deploy this as a master node, then K3S will generate a token, basically, which is needed for the workers to join this cluster. And the token is saved basically in one of the files on the master node. So what I'm doing in the script, I'm just connecting over SSH and checking that token, or actually loading that token from the file and saving it to the variable in my script, right? And then I'm doing pretty much, actually not yet. So first I'm downloading kubectl config, right? So yeah, it's as simple as just I'm copying the kubectl config, which was generated by K3S, on the master node to home directory on the master node, because on Google Cloud by default you don't have root access to the machines, right? You log into the machines, the virtual machines, as your user. So I'm just copying that kubectl config to the home directory of my user on the master node. Then just changing permissions so to my user. So then I can use SCP as my user to download that kubeconfig to my local machine, right? Then then I'm just doing simple set to change, because by default it's generated to be connected via localhost. So I'm doing set to change the localhost to the public IP address of the node, and then I'm just loading the kubectl config on my local machines, which is as simple as just moving that file to my kubeconfig. That was the first version. Let me remind you. So I created this solution just to do quick POC, quick tests. So for me, that was perfectly fine. I'm planning to do it a bit more sophisticated, a bit more smart, let's say. So instead of just overwriting my kubeconfig, I can just load it, right? So add it to the context. So that will come in next versions, let's say. I'll work on that. And then again, I'm doing the same deployment on the worker nodes, right? So I'm doing simple loop over the workers, where I create instances with gcloud again. Again, I need to enable them that IPVS kernel module, and then I'm doing similar command like you saw before, but this time I need to pass a different parameters. So I need to pass the token. The token which we talked about is basically the one generated on master node, which is basically authentication token in order to join the cluster. And then I'm instructing the script that this will be agent instead of the server. So it's not going to be deployed as Kubernetes master nodes, but Kubernetes worker nodes. Then I need to just pass the -- server parameter, which basically tells to workers where is the Kubernetes API, right? So where is the Kubernetes master node? So we're just passing the API, and that's it. So I just need to pass the token, instruct that it's an agent, and pass where's the server, and the rest is done for me by K3s. So the K3s is really amazing in this case, because you don't need to hack yourself much, because it just works. And after that, I'm just doing simple. I'm waiting, doing simple loop to wait for all the nodes to be ready. And I have basically it takes this 20 lines, because if you opt for version to load kubectl config, then I'm just using kubectl to check the nodes. If you didn't load the kubectl config, so if you set load kubectl config as false, then I'm using different method to check for the nodes, because then of course I can't use the kubectl. But basically, this whole bunch of code just checks, waits for the cluster to be ready, and that's it, right? So as you can see, it's nothing fancy, but it just works and does the job fast and easy. In the meantime, our cluster on DigitalOcean is ready. So we are a bit switching context here. So now we're coming back to the other version of the script when we deploy again kubectl cluster on the DigitalOcean, but this time we are installing also CCM, which is Cloud Control Manager, which means that this cluster will be able to talk to DigitalOcean API. So for that, I will talk in a second how actually does it work, like what the CCM does and so on, and how to deploy it. But first, let me actually show you something if it works as expected. So yeah, we are installing CCM, then we're deploying workers as before, then we're downloading kubectl config, and then we are installing external DNS as I mentioned before, and then we're installing Cert Manager. So what happens now? Now I have a cluster running on the DigitalOcean, right? With that Cloud Control Manager running. So if I now deploy, as I mentioned, if I just deploy some deployment, I have example deployment in the repository as well. So as you can see, it's basic deployment, Kubernetes deployment, right? When I'm just deploying Nginx. But yeah, I guess you understand this could be just basically your application, right? Listening on any port. So I'm just deploying Nginx in this case. Then I'm deploying standard Kubernetes service for that Nginx. And then I'm deploying Ingress for the deployment. So let's stop here for a bit. So K3s by default uses traffic as ingress, which is pretty cool, although they are switching back now to Nginx. I don't remember exactly why they use traffic, but they were forced to use traffic because there was something missing in Nginx ingress controller some time ago. But now Nginx is able to do it. So they are now in the process of switching back to use Nginx ingress as a standard ingress for K3s, but they're not there yet. So currently it's still traffic as a default ingress. So I'm using traffic as an ingress. Here, as you can see, I'm just specifying that I will use Let's Encrypt for DNS. Sorry, for the Cert Manager, I'm using Let's Encrypt DNS cluster issuer because, let me go back, because we use that external DNS, right? So I'm instructing the ingress that he can generate a certificate with Let's Encrypt DNS cluster issuer. And then if I just type my domain here, which is basically loaded in my DigitalOcean account. So if I just do this, then I can just deploy it. Yeah. So what should happen now is we will have this Nginx deployed with service and ingress. And then first, external DNS should pick up that I deployed ingress with domain specified. It should connect to DigitalOcean API and ask DNS to add an entry for that domain. And then Let's Encrypt will generate a certificate for it. So I should actually show you before that my DigitalOcean account was empty. I didn't, but trust me, it was empty. If I go now to my domain, oh, actually, it's other way around. Sorry, it's other way around. So first, Let's Encrypt will pick up new domain and generate token for validation the domain. So first, we are waiting for Let's Encrypt to generate the certificate for the domain, right? So it happens, as you can see, I just need to specify the domain in the ingress definition, and then Let's Encrypt does it for me. So after a couple of minutes, when the certificate is ready, so the certificate should be ready. The entry disappeared, which means certificate should be ready, which we can check by get certs. Yeah, the certificate is true, which means it's ready. So what should happen now is now external DNS should add the domain. So first, Let's Encrypt checks if it can validate the domain. If it can, as you can see, it happened. So then external DNS created the domain for me in DigitalOcean DNS. So now I can access this deployment over HTTPS on that domain, right? So the only thing I did was run the script, which created the cluster from scratch for me, right? Then I just deployed the deployment with my domain specified inside the ingress, and that's it. Everything, the rest was done for me. Now, probably it won't work yet because, of course, DNS refresh takes a bit of a time. Oh, actually, it does work. So I go to HTTPS. Yeah, ta-da. So we have that deployment over HTTPS on the domain. Yeah, in what, 5 minutes? So our cluster was running 137 seconds, and then I deployed the deployment, and then it took another, 1-2 minutes to create certificate and add the domain to the DNS. So as you can see again, let me show you something else, maybe to understand it better. If I can move that. So as you can see, on my DNS in DigitalOcean, I have this nginx.zsky.xyz domain. Don't have any other domains. So let me now do something else. Let me duplicate this. Example deployment 2. And now I change this to for developers.zsky.xyz, for developers.zsky.xyz. Okay, I'll have to change the name of the deployment to 1. 1, 1, 1, 1, service 1, 1, Nginx 1, Nginx service 1, yeah, and then app selector Nginx 1, yes, okay, ingress, Nginx service 1, Nginx service 1. Okay. I hope that works. Maybe I forgot to change something. Okay, ingress also should be 1. Let's see. Okay, if I didn't forget to change something else, then we should have now another domain with another SSL certificate Okay, let's see. Yeah, of course, I forgot to change this. Okay. Okay, so the certificate should be start to be generating now. Okay, so we have now a challenge for the Let's Encrypt for that new domain. And we have new domain as well. Does it mean it's ready? Oh, it's not. Yeah, probably because I forgot that one in secret and it was already generated. But it should still work anyway. Okay, it takes a few minutes anyway, so I will get back to that in a second. But yeah, if I wouldn't forget to change this, should still work. But if I wouldn't forget, then we would have another deployment with another certificate with another domain, right? So yeah, I hope you get that idea already. So we had nothing from zero to the cluster, and then automatic HTTPS and domain adding in in a couple of minutes. So we're going with time. I still have a couple of minutes. So let's talk about what will you use it for. So I mentioned at the beginning that this solution, I created this solution purely for test, right? So this never meant to be like production grade Kubernetes 60 seconds deployment. It was mainly for tests and POCs, and for this it's perfect. Of course, yeah, I wouldn't recommend to use it as a production cluster, although K3s is fully production ready distribution, right? So you can definitely use K3 as your production Kubernetes cluster. It was designed, K3s was designed to use in edge situation for IoT. So it didn't meant to be used as a replacement for normal Kubernetes. It was meant to be used for some special edge cases. But still, you can definitely use it as your Kubernetes cluster, right? Nothing forbids you that. It's as I mentioned, it's let's say normal Kubernetes just with some stuff deleted. So if it does what you need, like if you don't need some special extra plugins or whatever, then K3s would totally do the job for you. So in theory, you could definitely use it as a production cluster. But but again, this solution was mainly for test. However, let me show you what I was thinking about. So you could definitely use this as your dev environment, right? So we all have dev staging, pre-production, production, maybe also QA, maybe also test, whatever. So in most companies, we have a few environments, right? Few clusters. In many cases, the dev staging, they are pretty much the same as production, right? So they are big clusters. If you have hundreds of microservices, then your dev environment will be also a huge cluster. And your dev environment will run overnight and basically, 24 hours. If you are a bit more advanced in DevOps and stuff, maybe you destroy your development cluster for the night or for the weekends or when you don't need it. But still, quite a lot of companies just keep it running all the time. You could definitely use this instead of your dev environment. And what I mean by instead, you could have this cluster, this script, or basically this solution to run as your first step of your CI/CD, right? If it takes 1 minute to deploy a cluster, you can easily deploy it as your first step of CI/CD. So create a cluster first, then run whatever you need to run, some tests, some tests, integrations, whatever, and then just deploy the cluster afterwards, right? It works as a normal Kubernetes cluster. So if you just need to test application, then why not? It could save you quite some time and quite some money. As I mentioned, this script creates 4 nodes cluster, but if you want to create 100 nodes or 50 nodes or 20 nodes, you can change one line in the code and it will create it just fine. It will still take maybe 20 seconds more but it will still be pretty fast. You could use this as a pre-dev environment, let's say, right? So what happens normally in companies, you have one dev environment when the whole company works on it, or maybe you have a dev cluster per team or something like that. You could use this as a very first step for developers to test the application, right? If they just want to see how it works with different application, see how this solution works, that solution works, you can just deploy that cluster for them to do very first tests, right? And then if they are already happy to commit, then you could keep your normal dev environment to do more proper integrations tests, whatever. But basically this could save you some failed builds on the dev environment, right? If you could just do one step ahead. What you could also do, since we're talking about two different solutions here, right? One with the GCP, which only creates the cluster, simple cluster without load balancer, and the second solution, which creates the cluster with HTTPS and domains. So we could create here the solution which tests the application a bit better than normally, right? So we can deploy the application normally after the domain with HTTPS, which is pretty crucial usually when you want to redeploy test the application, right? If you want to test how it behaves, with proper domain instead of just generating self-signed certificates and so on and so on. So we could use this as also simple solution to do more fancy tests with your application, right? If you just want to test if your API connects well over HTTPS, if your front end connects well to your API, and so on and so on. So we could use this as a solution to do this more appropriate tests, right? Usually we have one domain which is dev.your application.your-domain.something. With this, you could do more per team or per developer even deployments, which brings us back to the point that what's DevOps all about, right? The faster developer or the easier for developer it is to test their code, the better your application will be, right? Because the faster feedback, the better it will be. So if the developer don't really need to wait for some approvals, for some other checks, for some access to the dev environments, if for him it will be as easy as just deploying using one bash script, or of course you include it in CI/CD. So the easier for him it is to test, the higher quality code you produce at the end, right? So overall, let me say it one more time. This wasn't a solution for replacing your managed Kubernetes. This was a solution for testing, for doing POC, for the first steps in the development process, right? So I'm almost finished. Let me see if that worked at the end. So it worked. So if I now go to developers.xyz, then again it works, and it works over HTTPS as well, right? So yeah, that's what all I was talking about. The easier it is to make the proper test, and by proper test I mean real domain with HTTPS instead of some self-signed stuff where you need to always call -- insecure to redo the test, and which doesn't always work the same as in production, because production is over real SSL. So sometimes we have those issues. So this solution where you can just deploy it very quickly with domain HTTPS could really help you and your team, basically. So with that, I thank you very much. I will post the link to repository where you can see the code, when you can see some instructions. I'll see that later. As you can see, you can also see that it took really less than 50 seconds, 60 seconds before. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, you can easily send the issues on GitHub or contact me on Twitter. And yeah, thank you very much.